set us up nicely for this. Do you feel like you belong here? I mean, here at this church, in this service of worship this morning, or online if you're not in person. I hope you do, but I ask the question. Do you feel like you belong in the work you are doing as a profession? Or have you ever felt like an imposter doing what you're doing? Like people are going to call you out, you don't belong here. Being in the same profession as my father and my grandfather, I sometimes have this sinking gut feeling of what am I doing? Or I can't imagine people want to hear one more sermon from me. All right, don't protest too much about that. You know, Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, two of the biggest superstars out there, speak of feeling like imposters even now in their work of acting. Our middle daughter, Naomi, started medical school up at UVM about a month ago, and one of the first things that they talked about as an incoming class was how to manage imposter syndrome. Feeling like you just don't belong. Must be a thing for doctors too. Or how about this? Do you feel like you belong in your age, in your 40s, in your 50s, in your 60s or 70s, or however old you are? I heard somebody say yes, but unequivocally no for me. I feel like I'm in my 30s, really. And I'm in my 50s. I know that's hard to believe. Do you ever feel like you don't belong even to the people you belong with? Your group of friends? Has it ever felt like that everyone else in the group feels a sense of belonging and it's just you who feel a little bit on the outskirts? And would it surprise you to hear that everyone in that group feels a little bit that way? Like they are the only one who doesn't quite fit or belong? What about a more existential here? As in, do you feel like you belong here on earth or in your body or at this point in history? Well, I'm sure you know that if you've ever felt any of those things, you are not alone. For we feel that because we belong to the human race, which has this odd disjoint within ourselves, which has us feeling like we just don't quite fit. We long for belonging, but don't necessarily feel it. There are moments, aren't there? And those moments are holy moments, heavenly moments of belonging and coming home finally to some extent or another. But there's often a sense that we're just out of place. That disjoint, that misfit, that out-of-placeness is practically what the Bible was written for. You can't get out of the second chapter of Genesis before you've been told the story of the first man and the first woman coming to realize that they don't belong in the Garden of Eden. And then you encounter this nomadic tribe of Hebrew people who rarely belong. I mean, their whole story is a story of not belonging. And though they are promised a promised land, more prominent in this story is their enslavement, where they so don't belong that in fact they belong to someone else. They're owned by others. It's the first we hear that such a condition of not belonging or belonging to others is not okay by God. So God finds an outsider person, the quintessential outsider, excluded person in Moses to let God's people go. And the Hebrews wander for 40 years in a wilderness where they do not belong. They finally come to the promised land, and the Canaanite tribes there who have taken up residence there certainly don't defer to the Hebrew claim that it's their promised land. But the Hebrews settle nonetheless and build a temple as a place of belonging for them. but they eventually get steamrolled by greater empires than themselves. The temple of belonging is destroyed, and they are exiled from where they belong to again, where they don't belong in Syria and Persia and Babylon time and again. A remnant eventually returns. Another temple is built, but their home is eventually occupied by the Roman Empire, and they are made to feel like they don't belong in their land, a reality and a threat that persists up to the horrors of the Holocaust, one of the most vivid examples of being told that you don't belong. But we say that the Messiah came out of these people who don't belong at the turning of the age, and you'd sure think that the sovereign of the universe, incarnate as human in the form of a Jewish man named Jesus of Nazareth, you'd sure think that this God at least would belong, this person would belong, but we know the story well, and he's born into poverty and has to escape to Egypt because Herod's decided he doesn't belong. And then much of Jesus' ministry is among the misfits. We heard Rich read about the gathering of these misfit men around him, men and women that gather around Jesus. And he seems to best belong, Jesus does, not with the religious leaders in the temple and the synagogues, but with those who don't belong. And he gathers up all of this not belonging, knowing how deeply and painfully those around him long for belonging, and he says, I've got good news for you. There is actually a place where you belong, and it's in the heart of God. It's as a citizen of the realm of God, and it's right here among us, a state of heart and mind, and it's true regardless of how dismissed you've been or marginalized or excluded, no matter how society has framed you as a misfit. You fit with me, you fit with God. And despite that beautiful message of belonging, or because of that message, the powers that be came down hard on him and said, you don't determine who belongs here, we'll decide that. And in fact, you are suspect number one of people who don't belong here. And so they execute him on the cross, and they spread his arms and nailed down his hands, ironically, in a gesture of wide open receptivity and embrace. By excluding him in the most complete way, by way of death, they unwittingly opened a gateway of belonging that reverberated through the ages and across the world. To all those told you don't belong, he spread wide his arms, saying, you do belong with me. I love this image up here. That's the spread wide arms of Jesus. You can't tell if he's reaching for an embrace or being crucified. To all those told you don't belong, his spread wide arms say, you do belong with me. Which it turns out was God's intention all along from the beginning, to alert us humans to the fact that we belong to the heart of God. We are God's children and beloved of and belonging to God. Each and every one of us. And quickly upon the resurrection, there arose gatherings of people who understood this and believed this strongly and intentionally created homes and houses of belonging in God's Spirit. Boom, and the church was born. And of course, the church, being an all too human institution at times, has taken God's project of belonging and found a way to disinvite people and make them feel like they don't belong. But its foundation and its purpose is to create a house of belonging for God's people. Which brings me back to my first question, do you belong here? And the simple answer to that is yes. Yes. Of course you belong here. It's not my church. or the church of those who have been here the longest, or the church of those who pledge and give money to keep the lights on and the doors open, though thank you very much for doing that. It's the church of Jesus Christ. It's the God's house of prayer. Everyone who holds a special place in the heart of God belongs here, and that's every single one of us. Everyone who holds a special place in the heart of God belongs here, and that's every single one of us. And that's one of our goals as a church, to create a community of belonging here. In our purpose statement, we say we are a Christ-centered, nurturing community, growing in faith, serving in love, and welcoming all with joy. That's a clear part of our purpose. So we hope you can find a house of belonging here if you want it. We are so glad that when those of you who consider this your church came here at first, there was enough sense of belonging that it overshadowed any sense of not fitting in, even if that's still a lingering sense you might have. Trust me when I say to you, you belong here. And if not here, because there are different strokes of churches for different folks, for sure. So if not here, then absolutely you belong to God and a community somewhere who understands how you are loved and favored by God thanks to Jesus' claim on your life. So it begs the question, how many people out there in our wider community belong here and just don't know it yet? And I would suggest that we won't know that until we get out there and welcome them in. Which I want to share with you is what some of us are going to do in the weeks ahead. It's kind of radical, I realize, for our progressive Christian community here in New England to be doing it, but we feel it's really important to do so. So your ministry team, Maeve and Jane, Maggie and myself, with Sarah Marino's support and the support of our leadership team and deacons, but the ministry team in particular has been working over this last month on a project called Welcome Home. And we've been meeting with a marketing director, believe it or not, in LA, who's actually a friend of Jane's. That was our connection, who has been leading us in developing materials about our church that we can then share with newcomers to Winchester. And with the help of some of the deacons and leadership team and anyone else among us who is interested, we are going to make some baked goods and bring them to people moving into town with a big welcome to town. We're glad you're here to accompany it. We are going to welcome people on behalf of our church and let them know that they are welcome here in the church as well. So it'll be a light touch with the baked goods and information about the town and a simple welcome. We're your neighbors, let us know if you need anything, sort of thing. I know this pushes the comfort zone of some of us Protestant mainline tradition people, but honestly, we have a lovely community here. Some really good things that happen within our church, a lot of love to share. A Christian community that is not condemning of homosexuals or disparaging of other faiths, that takes earth care seriously, that loves the arts, that offers community to children and youth, where justice is lifted up and seen as important, and so on and so forth. So who are we not to reach out to newcomers in town with an invitation to this beautiful church community? Those who usually go door to door can offer a different view of what it means to be Christian, and their voices are often the loudest, but we have a voice to share too about a beautiful community. So in the background, we are calling this the Marsha Lamson Project. Right. People who know Marsha Lamson know why we would call this the Marsha Lamson Project. Because if you know anything about our beloved Marsha Lamson, who died last year, way too soon for any of us, you know she loved to share things about our church with the wider town, and she loved to be a welcoming and loving presence to people, offering cards and flowers and whatever else as a gesture of care and friendship. Her husband, Ted, who's up in Maine this week, encouraged us to use some of the money that came into the church in honor of her for this purpose. The Marsha Lamson Welcome Home Project. And what we hope to find is someone, some family, some couple who, because of our welcome, might just find a house of belonging here. Someone who never would have thought it or come otherwise. And if that happens with a person or two, I think the effort would have been worth it because we have a beautiful house of belonging and we ought to share it. So let me know if you're like, ooh, I want to get out there and do that. Okay? You're welcome. And we're really looking for people within the neighborhoods of people moving into town. So it really is like a, hey, you're my neighbor. And I also go down the street to the church down the way. But welcome. Our church is welcoming people. But if that's too far out of your comfort zone, I still invite you this morning to note how important this human need to belong is. To take that out with you. How important it is in your own life, and how important it is to every other life you encounter. There is no one that it's not important to know a sense of belonging. Consider how in your circles and in your day-to-day life you might foster a sense of belonging for others, remembering how surprised you might be at who among you doesn't feel like they belong. Notice those who do not fit in. Create for some misfit some space of fitting where they too can belong. For this we know is what is important to God and what God calls us to, what God's justice looks like, the shape of heaven's walls, the contours of the holy temple, where wisdom and righteousness, justice and holiness join at the feet of God. As the choir will now sing, Amen.